Hi, and welcome to Talking Wildfire. Today I'm here with Tom Reinbolt, and Tom Reinbolt is the father of the BC Smokejumpers. And he is going to tell us the story of the Canadian Smokejumper programs that have happened, the different evolutions over the years. And this is Tom. Can you tell us a little bit about the history?
Yeah, so a little bit rusty on it right now, but I do have the timeline down, or most of the timeline down, from the first program that started in Canada was 1947, and that was in a place called L'Orange, Saskatchewan. And they jumped out of there for 20 years, 47 to 67. And there was a fellow, I think his name was Don Haddon, was the base manager. There's a CBC, so uh, public broadcaster documentary in black and white. If you go to their website, you can probably watch it. I think I've seen it there where you can just go and watch it. But Don Haddon was, I think, the base manager for a lot of that. And I ended up meeting him when I was jumping in the Yukon. So he came to the Yukon. He was a retired air attack officer. And he came up there and filled in one of the years I was up there. It wasn't my first year, but I remember him coming, and yeah, he brought some of the photos by the base and stuff, and we went for beers and chatted. So good guy. I mean, they jumped out of, from what I understand, as a Norseman on floats, and it had a tube in the middle of the plane. So they exited out in the middle, in between the floats, and came out. Um, and had a really, I believe the base is still there. I think the Quonsets and stuff are still in L'Orange, Saskatchewan. Lasted 20 years, and then they got canceled, I think, due to the fact that these newfangled things called helicopters had come along, and they thought it would be a better or easier way to access the fire. I probably have my own opinions on that, but anyway, that was the end of that program in 1967, which is oddly enough the year I was born. Then there was no smoke jumping for a period of about almost 10 years.
Tom, can you tell us a little bit about the gear that the first smoke jumper program in Canada had? And also, I understand there could have been a paracargo program before that. Can you tell us about that also? But start with the gear, please.
Yeah, from what I know, the gear was pretty much the same as what they were using in the US at the time. Probably, if I'm guessing, they probably piggybacked off that program as well. So I don't know if they were using 5As or what sort of parachutes. From what I can tell in the video, they just look, there are no steering in them. White, probably silk. Looks like they're just slipping with the rear riser. And the gear looks really similar in terms of the jump gear would have been old, I don't know if it was old canvas, just padded by the looks of it. Same sort of a football style helmet with the cage on the front. Really, it was pretty much, it looks pretty identical to the old school US Forest Service smoke jumper stuff that they were using at the time. And yeah, from what I know, there was a there was a paracargo program in Ontario for a short period of time. I don't know much about that one. I know for a while Ontario was using twin otters with as tankers, and they had the floats would dump water. They were scooping with the floats and dumping with the floats. In fact, I have a friend. I think they were using not just twin otters. Sorry, I think they were using single otters. I have a friend who has an otter here in town, and he bought a set of the floats. So he has a set, and yeah, they did a paracargo program as well. But when I was in the Yukon, we got some of their gear because they contacted us and asked us if we wanted it. It was just sitting in a warehouse, and we said sure. But it turned out to be old cotton parachutes, and cotton the shroud lines were cotton as well. So we did a couple of test drops with it, but they failed miserably. The cargo separated from the parachute. So we didn't end up using them, but there were some round containers, like little round bins that they had that they were using for dropping the cargo in as well. I don't know when that paracargo, I probably look it up as to when that paracargo program was. Um, those were orange and white um, parachutes, and they were each gore was, one was, they were alternated orange versus white. So I want to guess that that was post the Saskatchewan program and pre Northwest Territories, which was the next smoke jumpers that came to Canada. And that was in the mid 70s in a company called International Forest Fire Fighting or International Firefighting Services, I believe. IFIS was the name of the program. And that program was started by, there was a couple Canadian fellows. One fellow, his last name was Henderson. I can't remember his first name. And a couple of U.S. jumpers, one by the name of Mike Markison, and another one I want to say is Rob Risley or something like that. And he enticed these U.S. smoke jumpers to come up and start in the Northwest Territories. And they had, at their peak, they had 2 or 3 bases. They were jumping out of a Twin Islander. Was one of the planes they were using. I don't know if they ever used the DC-3 or not, like we had in the Yukon, but definitely the Twin Islander. And in fact, I think that's one of the only known jumper in tow that I ever heard about was on that. In fact, I met the spotter when the first year I started in fire. The spotter was running a base in Williams Lake in British Columbia, the guy who spotted that fire. And after I became a jumper, I looked him up again later. His name was Phil Ranson, and I asked him about it, just about the event. So yeah, I think it was on a fire jump, and jumper in tow. They cut him loose. He ended up landing somewhere near the fire. They found him smoking a cigarette next to a tree, which just sounds
Well,
great.
I've seen a picture of the when it was hung up on the aircraft.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, a long time ago, yeah.
But that program lasted. So they had, I want to say, 2 bases. I think one was Hay River. Man, I wish I could remember the other one. But there was a couple bases in the NWT, and there was one in the Yukon Territory, I believe, out of Whitehorse. But they had some financial difficulties. I think they were having trouble paying some of the employees. So a couple of the employees from that program, a fellow by the name of John Horning, another fellow by the name of Dave Thompson, and I think there might have been one more, but I can't remember his name. They decided, because they weren't getting paid, they were putting themselves through university at the time. And one was becoming a tax lawyer and the other was becoming a chartered accountant. So they just started their own program. And that was called Kuswa Contracting. And they started in 1984 in the Yukon Territory. And I think they might have started rappelling that year. They didn't do jumping, but after a couple of years, they convinced the Yukon to go back into jumping. And they started the program that I ended up applying for and getting on in 1989. I worked first for them in Helitack in British Columbia, but then I got on, because I was in the system, I got on with their jump program. And I jumped there from 89 to 95, and 95 was the last year of that program. That was the year it was canceled at the end of that, well, in the spring of 96. So that program lasted, I want to say, 86 to 95. So about 10 years there was jumping in the Yukon all out of piston dug, provided by North Caribou and by Buffalo Airways in the Northwest Territories. So those were the 3. So it started government, was 20 years of government in Saskatchewan, then went to contract in the NWT, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon Territories. And then that sort of failed, and out of that came the Yukon Kuswa, which was also contract, and then did full circle. And then I got it going, starting it with government again in British Columbia, which started in 1998. So there was a couple year period between the end of the Yukon and the start of this one.
And your program is still going, right? For the people who don't know.
Yeah, still going now.
Well, that's good. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. And Tom, what's the main differences that you can see with the Canadian programs and the U.S. programs? Because you've been interacting with both of them within, say, the U.S. Forest Service or BLM and the BC Forest Service. Do you see any differences?
Well, the main difference now, obviously, is the parachute, because the U.S. has gone all to the squares or ram airs. And we were still using and still are using the rounds and the FS-14s in BC. That's probably the main difference. Other than that, there's always small differences. The good thing about smoke jumping is it's flexible, fluid enough to find its niche. And so no matter what sort of topography, no matter what sort of terrain, no matter what sort of fire program you find yourself in, you'll sort of tailor yourself to the niche that you fit. And so, of course, there's small differences, but if you wanted to judge or compare the BC program, it would fit most easily with Alaska. Very similar in terms of long distances. You're covering a lot of terrain where logistical issues exist, and not only in fuel but in fire equipment, larger fires. So that flying warehouse kind of thing is more of what's used in BC.
Do you use lots of pumps and flappers then, or are you using Pulaskis, or what's your main tools that you guys use?
Yeah, not a flappers would be a different. Not a lot of flappers, maybe in the spring grass fire season, because we do the base is located kind of in an agricultural area, but you quickly end up in the black spruce as you fly north out of this town. And yeah, then there's a lot of depends which direction you go. If you go north, you're in what we call a C2 fuel type, which is yeah, black boreal spruce. And a lot of standing water everywhere, so a lot of Mark III pump is used everywhere. If you fly west from this location within, 15, 20 minutes flight time, you're in the mountains, in the Rocky Mountains. So then you're still using, I mean, one of the beauties of jumping in British Columbia that I found compared to the jumping I did in the lower 48 in the States is um, the lower 48 is very rugged and dry terrain. The Rocky Mountains in British Columbia are rugged, but there always seems to be a meadow and there always seems to be a stream or a little pond somewhere to pump out of. So we get it a little bit easier, I'd have to say, than the fellas in the lower 48 do. But yeah, so still a lot of Mark III use in the mountains and that forest, but sometimes it's just a dry fire with Pulaskis and stuff. And if you fly south from here, you start to get into similar terrain to like the Okanagan. So like Wenatchee, Washington kind of stuff. We get that in what we call the Okanagan area for us too, sort of Kelowna and that area. And then we've even jumped some fires. They've jumped a couple fires in the coast on Vancouver Island and that. It's a rarity, but we do it just because the Turbine 3 has, can be pretty much anywhere in British Columbia in 2 hours. So we're able to hit anywhere. So sometimes if they get behind the curve, they'll just call for us. And we don't necessarily have to jump, but if we can, we do. So sometimes it's just easier to go straight to the fire. And I know they've jumped a couple on Vancouver Island and just in the coasts as well. So
I visited both your base and Rapattack too, and it seemed to me that the helicopters had the south, and maybe you guys have the north. Is that true? The way it's divided there?
yeah, I would say they have the populated south, but there are areas in the south, like the Caribou, we call it, Williams Lake area, where there's still vast amounts of country without a lot of um, human settlement in terms of major towns. So we do a lot more work in that sort of would be south and west of us. If you go south into sort of the Okanagan type area, there's a lot of small towns very close together and a lot of steep rocky terrain where the rappel program works out of. We do jump in that area as well, but it's generally when they get behind the curve on having enough crews to handle the amount of work they get. I think that's one of the ways this program has tailored itself into the BC system is the meat and potatoes is long distance dispatches and larger fires. And then behind that, the next thing is sort of the ability to be anywhere in 2 hours means that, as you know, in fire, you're trying to guess where the lightning bust is going to happen. And if you guess wrong, there's a time lag in getting crews there. And we fill that time lag because we can get there quickly. So it's, in a lot of cases, we can get there quicker than helicopters from a locally dispatched. So they don't lose a lot of time. So it's a good way for us to fill that void.
Well, Tom, thanks a lot for sharing the history of Canadian smoke jumping with us and telling us a bit more about BC. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
We're doing this for all of you. If you like what we're doing, please give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment below. See you next time.